Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Joss ends things with Dex, leading him to make a drastic move, and Sonny receives support from, spoiler. Today on General Hospital, Marshall learns why he was misdiagnosed. Nina asks Ava for help again. Diane has a plan to get Alexis her law license back, and Tracy and Sonny have a moment. Please note that if you purchase something by clicking on a link within this story, we may receive a small commission of the sale. At Dex's, Nina leaves Joss and Dex after opening a can of worms and bringing up seeing Dex leave Cyrus' room in scrubs. Joss asks Dex about the incident Nina mentioned. Dex admits he was told to go to the hospital by Sonny to kill Cyrus. Joss can't believe he'd agree to something like that. Dex says he tried to talk Sonny out of it, so she assumes Nina was stirring up trouble, and of course, he'd never do that. Dex admits he was going to do it, but Sonny stopped him. Joss realizes this was the night Adam was in the hospital, and she kept thinking she was lucky to have him there by her that night, but he was there to kill Cyrus. Joss asks if he is telling her that he would have killed Cyrus if Sonny didn't stop him. Dex admits he would have. Joss asks, "Who are you?" Dex says Sonny gave him an order, and he didn't see a way out. He says this was a test, and he's just glad Sonny changed his mind. Joss says he crossed a line she didn't think possible, and it's like she doesn't know him. She says this was different than being fired on by men with guns. This was a defenseless old man in a hospital, and she has issues with him being okay with killing someone. He says he's killed before. She knows he has, and she's put him on this pedestal in her head and never imagined he'd be okay with something like this. She cries this changes everything, and she can't do this anymore. Joss storms out on Dex. Dex breaks out a bottle of booze, pauses, but then makes a call to the police non-emergency number. At the gallery, Trina gets to work, and a certain artist makes her think about Paris. Ava worries being here isn't helping Trina right now. Trina doesn't know what will help her. Ava tells Trina she needs to give herself time to get through this. An upset Nina arrives hoping Ava has time to talk. Trina excuses herself, and Nina needs Ava to help her get to Sonny. Ava says right now her timing isn't good, as she won't look good if she tries to distract him away from Dante. Nina cries she wants to be there to support him, to help him through this. She thinks if Ava advocates for her, then he'll listen. Trina interrupts and says a late package is on its way. An emotional Ava says she needs to leave and asks if Trina can wait for it and then lock up after. Trina can, and worries something is wrong. Ava says she'll be fine, and she and Nina take off. Later Joss arrives in tears, and Trina asks if it's Dante. Joss says it's not. Trina asks her to take a breath, or she'll start crying with her. Joss explains she thought nothing could change how she feels about Dex, but she's been wrong. What he's okay with, she's not, and what he can live with, she can't and won't. Trina embraces her friend. Diane says the state legal board didn't come after Alexis until the medical board went to them about Neil's case. Alexis asks what this has to do with her. Diane goes over the case and evidence that got Alexis disbarred and asks why she didn't fight for herself. Alexis says it was true, but Diane calls that irrelevant. She had a right to mount a defense. Alexis guesses at the time she didn't think she had anything to fight for. Diane tells her to shake that feeling off, because working here isn't working for her, and they need to get her out of here. Diane recalls Alexis wasn't her best back then and drinking, and she thinks there is a case of bias as the medical profession hates lawyers more than anything, plus she's a female lawyer. Diane makes some calls to find out the next steps, and she must file a few appeals to get to the top courts. Alexis wonders why she threw her career away to save Niels again. Diane says because she's a rescuer and her own biggest enemy. Alexis hopes she isn't that person anymore, and she still roots for the underdog. Diane wants her to root for herself, and she'll start the process rolling. She also suggests Alexis not sleep with doctors, only attorneys. Finally, Diane tells her, "Get rid of that gossip columnist that came after me." In Kevin's office at the hospital, Marshall doesn't understand why he was misdiagnosed, and did he have to be mentally ill to be feeling the way he was back then? Kevin tells him that he just diagnosed his misdiagnosis. Kevin explains medicine has come a long way from where it began, but made many mistakes on the way. Psychiatry is a younger science and also has fumbled. He says scientists like to be right, and at the time of his diagnosis, they were still struggling with what mental illness was, and what normal was. Back then, the control group for normal was white, predominantly educated, and church-going people, and if you were not part of that group and couldn't present in a certain way, then you were looked at as a problem, an illness. Kevin continues that back then defiant, angry, young black men were tagged as schizophrenic, even if they weren't. A big hallmark of the disease then was people believing an institution, such as the government, was out to get them. Marshall recalls being afraid back then. He thought something was wrong with him, which is why he got help. Kevin says the medications prescribed to him likely made things worse. He says a generation of unhappy women were given Valium, and LGBTQ people were institutionalized and given shock therapy. Curtis remembers fearing he'd harm those he loves, and the shame he felt. Kevin says the shame was and always will be on his profession. Stella gets fired up that those mistakes were made from racism and other SMS, and as a patient advocate even today, she has to fight harder for women, people of color, and other minorities. She vents there is no excuse for any of this. She doesn't understand why they are still dealing with these issues when they are all human, and biology is biology. Kevin knows his apology is meaningless, but Marshall says he told him the truth and validated him. Curtis wonders how many others this doctor did this to. Kevin says there were others, as Braddock was a respected and well-published doctor. Marshall says he's grateful to him, and Kevin says his door is always open if he needs to talk. Sonny sits with Dante and knows he's in God's hands, but tells him not to give up on himself, and he won't give up on him. Tracy stops in to see Dante and finds Sonny with his son. She explains she came to check on him as Olivia was up most of the night worried. She becomes teary, and says every time she sees a hospital bed she thinks about Luke in one. Later, Tracy speaks with Stella at the nurse's station about being kept up to date on Dante's condition. Stella reminds Tracy that as a board member, she qualifies for a free annual exam here at GH. Tracy asks if she looks sick. Stella says she looks foolish as here she stands the picture of privilege and an example of the medical system which she just stepped off her soapbox ranting about. Tracy snaps that she'll get the exam, but she has to check her schedule first. Stella huffs off, but Tracy stops her and apologizes for being rude. Stella admits she was already worked up, and besides, Tracy's been rude to her before. They smile at one another. Meanwhile, in the PT, Curtis talks to Marshall about what they learned. Marshall would love to holler and curse, but he can't get what Stella said out of his head, that they are all human. He doesn't understand why they can't act like it, and now he finds himself in the position of having to forgive that doctor. Irene always said forgiveness isn't as much for the other person as it is for themselves. He can't carry around hate for that man, or he'll turn into a hateful person. Marshall says that the doctor is dead, but he's here with his family. He thinks it's proof of the existence of God. Back in Dante's room, a woman enters and puts her hand on Sonny's shoulder. He looks up and sees it as Ava. He is surprised they let her in, and she says nobody stopped her, and the nurse's station told her Dante was stable. He says they shouldn't have, and she guesses they thought she was Nina. He asks her not to say that name. Ava offers to stay with him and promises she won't talk, just be here for him. On the next General Hospital, BLQ calls John a disgrace to the badge. Liz thinks the only thing that matters is the law. Willow thinks bringing Danny into this mess was the worst thing he could have done. Carly tells Joss, that's not a realistic option and you know it. Dex appears to be in Anna's office and says, I did it, and I'm prepared to pay for it. Sonny tells someone that he'll keep it a secret. Jason says, it will make it like it never happened.